yourself on the screen if you want, but then
Uh-huh.
everybody will see you. Remove yourself now.
Oh my agraha, when it's a long A at the front, agraha means eagerness to accept. And when it's a short A, agraha, it means failure to accept. So Rupa Goswami is using this word in two ways to express this point has it's two different points in one, which are practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. So these are the two extremes that I was referring to. And so from this verse from Rupa Goswami, we can understand that these two extremes are both dangerous for our bhakti. If, like in the instance of the first one I mentioned, where devotees are very strict about following all the rules and details to the letter in certain areas, if it's not for the sake of spiritual advancement, if it's for it can become a little bit irrelevant and out of place, in the sense that the point is that whatever rules and regulations are there in the varnashram duties, they are meant to be for spiritual advancement. And if they're practiced in such a way that is not for spiritual advancement, that is for some other kind of motivation, then they're not helpful. So this is very important to understand. And it's also very important to avoid the opposite extreme, where sometimes devotees say, all this Vedic system, it's not relevant anymore. We don't have to follow it. They just dismiss it. So, according to the Vedas, knowledge, real knowledge, means to understand the difference between matter and spirit. And this is the crux of what I'm going to be talking about. And it applies in different ways. So when it comes to understanding how to follow, how to engage the Vedic teachings, how to engage with them in such a way that it helps us in our Krishna consciousness, which is the whole point of it, we have to understand the difference between principles and details. And this is very, very important. This is explained by Rupa Goswami also. He mentions this in the Nectar of Devotion. So there's a lot of confusion goes on in ISKCON because of sometimes a failure to understand the difference between principles and details. So how do we understand the difference? Principles are, that is like a tattva. It means the main principles of Krishna consciousness, which are not subject to change, which we should always follow, like chanting Hare Krishna, following the basic regulative principles, and just the basic tattva, like understanding the difference between the soul and God, the material world and the spiritual world. And so in Srila Prabhupada's teachings, this is very important to understand as well, because sometimes there's a confusion around Prabhupada's instructions, that sometimes devotees we see things that appear to be contradictory in his teachings. But actually there is no contradiction, because Prabhupada actually gave us the most important teachings in his books. Pretty much everything that's in his books, or most of it, is principles, goes into the category of principles, in that it should be followed. No, actually, sorry, I will amend that. There are some things in Prabhupada's books that also come into details when it's from the Vedic scriptures, like from the Bhagavatam. So we have to understand the difference, because it's not as simple as saying that everything in his books is principles and then say everything in his letters is details, or like that. It's not that simple, actually. We really have to learn how to perceive the difference, how to understand, because the details, as opposed to principles, are the things that are adjustable, that can be adjusted according to time, place, and circumstance. So Srila Prabhupada, his teachings were very dynamic. When he was present, he would often make adjustments. You could say right from the beginning, when he came to the West, that he was making adjustments. And the whole purpose was to accept whatever was favorable for Krishna consciousness and to reject whatever was unfavorable. And this is actually the bottom line. And this is also, again, from Srila Rupa Goswami, who is you could say the king of the acharyas, in the sense of giving us the basic instructions of how to practice Krishna consciousness. So Srila Prabhupada was following in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami, and he had the mood of Rupa Goswami, in the sense of that he had that full understanding of how to adjust things according to time, place, and circumstance. He was guided by his Guru Maharaj, who was also very expert in this, and he was guided by the previous acharyas and by the Lord. So when there appear to be some contradictions, there is not really any contradiction in Prabhupada's spiritual teachings. It's just that details could be adjusted according to time, place, and circumstance, and the principles remain the same throughout. And we also need to learn how to adjust things according to time, place, and circumstance in our preaching, in our practices going forward, especially in our preaching, because otherwise we just get stuck. And Krishna consciousness is a dynamic process. It's a stagnant process. So it's very important that we learn to understand these things. So regarding the duties of women, that comes under details. Varnashram duties comes under details. Varnashram dharma is all the details. So when it comes to details, we follow them as far as possible, and we adjust them where necessary. And that's the difference between Varnashram Dharma and Sanatan Dharma. So coming back to the title, that's why I'm going to talk about gender differences and spiritual equality. Again, gender differences, that comes to detail in the sense that it's external. Detail means things that are external, that are changeable, so they are in a sense material. Whereas principles are spiritual, and so they are eternal, and they never change. So external and internal. So the topic of gender differences, it's very controversial in this day and age, as you know. There are a lot of people nowadays who are trying to negate differences, gender differences between men and women, because especially among feminists, because they want equality with men. However, real equality is spiritual. People want equality because because actually that's a need of the soul. Because as souls, we are all equal. In the eyes of God, we're all equal. So therefore, people naturally desire equality. But the problem is they don't understand the difference between matter and spirit. They don't understand the difference between the soul and the body. So they're trying to get material equality, and it doesn't really work because there is no such thing as equality on a physical level. On a physical level, on a psychological level, on an intellectual level, everyone is different. We're all different. Size, strength, intelligence, in so many ways, everyone is different. So there is no such thing as equality on a material level. There's no such thing as equality in material science, and yet this concept of equality is embedded in the modern system of democracy. Everyone wants equality. But it is actually, because there's no such thing as equality on a material level, because material externally we're all different, therefore equality is actually a metaphysical entity. And in one sense, this is a proof that there is, for people who believe only in material science, this is a proof that we live in a two-dimensional universe, because there are certain beliefs that people hold which are completely metaphysical. Even morality is completely metaphysical. There's no such thing as morality in material science. It's all about matter. It's all about what can be seen, what can be observed, what can be experimented upon. So this is a good thing to help us in our preaching to people who have poor faith, that the proof that there is a metaphysical world, that there's a metaphysical dimension or a spiritual world, is that people believe in equality, people believe in morality, they are against evil. They don't believe in murder. They don't believe in that children should be killed, that women should be raped. So there's a basic morality which is shared by everyone, and that is present in the soul. And that doesn't depend on gender or race or age or anything else. It's there in everyone. And also that people love, that people believe in love. And where does love come from? So this is a way to explain to people the existence of God. Anyway, regarding gender differences, the controversy, coming back to that controversy, nature versus nurture. Have you heard about that? That that people, some people believe that the gender differences between men and women are coming from social conditioning, from socialization, and if that conditioning is changed, then there will be no difference. But actually, it's interesting that the scientific evidence is mounting now that there is a difference, that there are many differences have been observed, and scientific evidence means that these things have been observed from observing children, right from day one, you could say, and by doing research among wide groups of people. So it has been found without a doubt that there is not only physical, obviously, but psychological differences between men and women. And I mean, as devotees, I think most of you understand that, because you're not faithless people, and you're intelligent women. But it's interesting to talk about these things because it helps us to also convince others, and also to make it really more clear for ourselves. There's also some devotees, some of you may have read this, the Mars and Venus series of books. They've been out for a while now, by John Gray. And they're also very interesting because he did a lot of research with a lot of people in his work as a psychologist or psychiatrist. And he really found that, especially in relationships, there were certain behavioral trends across the board for women and for men about how they relate, how they express themselves, their needs, their primary needs. And so these gender differences actually, as in the psychological differences between men and women, can create a lot of misunderstandings in married life. And so it's really helpful to understand them. And those of you who are married, I'm sure you have navigated a lot of these and learnt about them. Those of you, even those of you who are not married, you have obviously noticed differences in dealings with your father or your brother or friends or teachers or temple presidents or anyone else. You can observe, different different ways of expressing and relating and thinking between men and women. And of course, these are all the external differences I was talking about, because as mentioned in the title, that the real equality is spiritual. And, it's really, the reason I picked this topic is because I feel it's really important to keep this in mind. Like in marriage, for example, when we get caught up in the gender differences, in when we start to see the difference is because we are all so different. We are all unique individuals, and we are all influenced by our social conditioning, by our upbringing, by our previous experiences, our childhood experiences. There are so many influences that shape us externally, psychologically, and that really affect us, and we can't deny them. They're there, and they become really apparent when we enter Grahasta ashram, that we that we are living with someone 24/7, especially in this lockdown. And we really, these differences become apparent, that sometimes, it is a little bit like Mars and Venus, that we feel like we're coming from two different planets. But that's why we need to learn to understand the differences, and at the same time to remember that as spirit souls, we have a spiritual connection. And actually, as we go through marriage, we gradually develop the spiritual connection. Because when we stick with a relationship, and when we manage to face all the challenges that come in the way, to face them, to go through them, and to overcome them, which is not an easy task. But as we do, and as we stick with that relationship, as we stick with that marriage, then gradually we develop deeper connection and spiritual connection, because when we appreciate someone, when we are grateful to someone, these are all you could say spiritual perceptions, because we're seeing the person within. We are seeing past all that stuff, all that gender stuff, the ego, the different, because we all have different tastes and opinions. When we're seeing past that and just connecting on a deeper level, then it becomes spiritual. And so that real equality is spiritual, and it goes beyond the gender differences. And that is what I wanted to say. So, so within Grahasta ashram, there are principles and details to be followed for us as devotees. So, for example, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in Canto 7, I think it is, the teachings of Narada Muni. Getting a bit rusty on that now, but that was all covered in my previous book, which I published about 9 years ago, called The 4 Goals of Family Life. And so those teachings are very helpful. Now, when I mentioned earlier that the Vedic teachings, when it comes to varnashram duties, they are details, and they don't necessarily have to be followed to the letter if it's not practical. So that's, I think that's clear for everyone to understand. But at the same time, we don't reject them, because they can be very helpful, because those details are actually based on principles. So let me give some examples here just to make it more clear. Like, for example, the wife is the homemaker. Nowadays, as you know, things have changed a little. Many women go out to work. They don't just stay at home. So this may be out of necessity or for whatever reason. It's not. There's nothing wrong with that. But the important thing for those who are married, if they're going to go out to work as women, it's just really important to also protect the relationship with the husband and the family. And of course, you all know that because you're doing it for your family. But sometimes what happens, we get so caught up in our work that it's very difficult to give good attention, proper attention to the needs of the husband and the family. And it can be difficult, it can be stressful. This is modern life. So we have to be expert. For those of you who are going out to work, for those of us who are working or doing other service from home also, we have to be very expert. We have to learn how to not neglect anyone and, give priority to our partner and our family because they're the most important things for us, the most important people for us, alongside the Guru and Krishna, of course, who is Krishna is our ultimate, that's our ultimate relationship. But in the meantime, while we're here in this world, we have very important relationships that we need to hold on to, we need to protect. So, so that's why, because of this different circumstance, when the Bhagavatam teaches about duties for women, they are based on a system and a culture and a society where the women stayed at home and the men went out to work. And so all the household duties for the women are encouraged there, and which is a very nice system. However, it's not always the same in this day and age, as you all know. So, so sometimes the wife is going to support the husband in terms of bringing home the bread and butter, and alternately, the husband will reciprocate, hopefully, by supporting the wife in household duties, and usually they do, because it's a necessity. It's a matter of necessity. So that's one. It's one example of a good reason why the Vedic teachings, in terms of details about duties for women, cannot always be followed, and we have to adjust. We have to be practical. We have to do what works. So that's why the most important thing is actually to follow the principles of Grahasta ashram, the spiritual life. So I just want to mention a few principles, and this is actually something I'm writing about in my new book that I'm still working on now. So few of the most important things to remember to protect our marriages, our relationships, and these principles, because they are kind of spiritual principles, so they apply across the board, actually, in all relationships, most of them. So first of all, mutual respect. That's like a basic principle. Mutual respect is just so important in relationships, to protect relationships. It's really fundamental. And yeah, and then another one, really fundamental, is kindness, to be kind to each other. And another one is humility. And this is a tough one, of course, because we all have false egos, not only the men, but we too as women. We all have false egos. And sometimes we have to bite the bit, so to speak, and control that ego, tame that ego, and practice some humility. And humility is such a wonderful quality. It is it's perhaps the most important quality that is taught for devotees, Janada Pisunichena, and all the rest of it. So, because even in our spiritual practices, the chanting of the holy names, it's all about humility. And this is really, really important in married life, that, when things get hot, when things heat up, when we argue, as we all naturally do, then we have to bring in the old humility and to cool the whole thing down. And there's a lot more about that in my new book that I'm working on about conflicts and the rest of it. Self-control. So that is another main principle, is a self-control, learning how to control anger. And this is something we all struggle with sometimes, and we all need to work on in spiritual life and in Grahasta ashram. And another very, very important principle in Grahasta ashram is forgiveness, to learn how to forgive. Because we all make mistakes, to err is human. And we have to learn to not hold grudges and just let things go. And that way we keep it cool. And and then also, because we're talking here about not just about marriage in general, but about Grahasta ashram in particular, which means for devotees. So it's important to follow religious principles and to chant, to keep up some sadhana, chanting and hearing, associating with devotees, reading the books, Prabhupada's books. You all know all of these processes, which we're all following to some degree. So these are really vital, because there's of course a big connection between the two, between spiritual life and developing these qualities. So as devotees, we ought to have an advantage in this, because we are practicing spiritual life. And by practicing spiritual life, if we are doing it sincerely, then we ought to be developing divine qualities such as kindness, humility, forgiveness, etc. And also sacrifice, especially in Grahasta ashram. Sacrifice is very important. That is explained in the Vedic teachings about charity. Charity being a very important principle for Grahastas, to share, to feed others. And there are many devotees who are doing great service in these areas. So talking of, for us as women in particular, because those are general, the principles are general, really, because when it comes to divine qualities, I call them divine qualities because they're qualities of the soul. All the divine qualities, such as humility and kindness, compassion, these are all qualities of the soul. So they are common to both men and women. And that is why this spiritual equality is even more important than the gender differences in marriage. Now we need to acknowledge and learn the gender differences as well, just to negotiate, because we are not yet liberated souls. We are in these bodies and minds. And so all these things apply to us. Sorry, I'm going to use my phone here. I hope you all can see me in some way. So I'll just mention a few things about the differences. Which are mentioned, like, for example, just hang on. Actually, it's not there. Like in terms of emotions, yes, actually, what I was going to say is that these, I mentioned before that gender differences are being looked at by scientists, and it's being discovered that they do exist. And this is actually understood, like, for example, by evolutionary biologists, that these gender differences have come from somewhere, and that is from the different roles that we are programmed for. So, for example, men have more kind of leadership skills, and women have more nurturing skills, because of being the ones who obviously give birth to children, nurse them and raise them. So we have the nurturing and caring skills more programmed into us. And so emotionally, women tend to be more softer, gentler, and kinder. These are considered to be feminine qualities. And whereas men tend to be more, you could say, more competitive and more rational, systematic in the way they do things. So now, of course, it's kind of a generalization, but just to give some kind of glimpse into the differences. And I think one of the good things about being in a close, supportive relationship is that we also can learn from each other. The strengths and weaknesses that we each have, we bring into the relationship, and we learn from each other. And in this way, we can help each other to become more rounded and balanced and grounded in, there's so many things we can learn from each other. So, and, there are general feminine and masculine qualities, which, instead of denying them, if we actually embrace them, then we feel more comfortable in our own skin, so to speak. And we can actually just be happy with those. And and we understand, obviously, as devotees, we understand that the body is temporary, that we pass through so many bodies, some male and some female. So we also learn to not identify with that on a spiritual level. But at the same time, we understand that according to our karma, for some reason or another, we have got these bodies, and so there's some reason for it. So let's use whatever skills and talents we've been given in Krishna's service. And that is also an important issue, that because we're all individuals, we're not just male or female, but we're all unique individuals. And so we have certain strengths and weaknesses that we've received according to our gender. And then we also have certain strengths and weaknesses that we possess as individuals. And those also ought to be used in Krishna's service. Because if we don't use those in Krishna's service, it's kind of like, Krishna's given us a gift, and it's almost like throwing it back in his face if we don't actually use it. It's not really being grateful. So so that is why the Vedic rules for men and women, they need to be flexible, because Krishna's gift, in the sense that, we shouldn't take it to an extreme that as women we should just stay at home, cook, clean, look after the children, nothing else. Because whatever other talents we've got that we've been given by Krishna, we should also use those in his service. And I think that's important to understand, not just in family life, but in ISKCON in general, that that women in ISKCON that are doing service in temples or in ISKCON in general, they should be they should have the freedom to serve according to their propensity, according to their talents, according to their desires, which are connected to the gifts they've been given. And that's something that Prabhupada, he allowed, because in one sense he gave us the teachings of the Vedic scriptures of the Bhagavatam, and on the other hand, in practice, he engaged women in preaching, in kirtan, in so many services, and he didn't just tell them, go home and clean and cook. He, because the higher principle is actually preaching, and a higher than Varnashram Dharma is Sanatana Dharma, our eternal service to Krishna, devotional service. So we have to learn how to balance these two and practice them side by side, so that we have a balanced view, we have a balanced understanding of the way things work.
Last one here.
Sorry. Sorry.
Microphone is underneath, yeah? Sorry, take off your hands from there.
I don't think I covered the microphone, but yeah, maybe a little bit. Okay, I'll try to speak louder, and I hope you all can hear me. Oh yeah, I see a message there now. It says better now. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not used to doing a broadcast on my phone. Okay, so I would like to be able to take questions. So I'm not sure how to do that on this. So the questions, okay, so I can't hear you. So I will take questions. If you can actually type in your questions, then I will try to answer your questions. So does anyone have a question they would like to put? Otherwise, I will just carry on speaking. Yeah. Please post questions only, someone is saying. Okay, so here there's a question from Ramani Vishaka Ramya Rajana. Can you elaborate on women not only being a homemaker, but using their skills? Okay, so, I could just mention myself as an example, if you like, that, I like to write. So I am writing books, trying to write books. It's going very slowly. I'm still on my second one. But that's something that I enjoy doing and that I'm trying to do in Krishna's service, to write books. The first book I wrote was mainly for devotees. The second one, I'm trying to make it broader for all kinds of people. So that's just one example. Whatever other talents and skills you have, like, for example, some women, they go out and distribute books or preach. Some women have different skills, like that they use in the service of devotees, like for example, medical. Some women, they have medical or healing skills that they may use in the service of devotees, as well as perhaps using to for an income to help support their family. And yeah, there are so many different examples. They I could go on and on, but yeah, I think I'll go on to the next question now. This is from Kamaniya Devi. It says, question from Rad's Raisin. What should be the mood of both wife and husband in marriage towards each other on bodily levels and towards service to each other to help elevate in Krishna consciousness? It says see more, but that's all I can get. So I'll start with that. So what should be the mood of both wife and husband in marriage towards each other on body level and towards service to each other to help elevate in Krishna consciousness? The mood should be a mood of service. So when we serve each other, we are serving devotees. If you're married to a devotee and you are serving him and he is reciprocating with you, then we are serving devotees. And serving devotees means indirectly we're serving Krishna. So really there's no difference. So what we learn to do in marriage and what we're learning to do in ISKCON, they're both the same in one sense, because we're learning to serve. And by learning to become selfless servants in our relationships, that is one way that we can learn how to become selfless servants of Krishna. So in whichever way we're serving each other, it's all service. So I hope that makes sense. Okay, next question from Ritz Petits. Hare Krishna, dear Mata, you mentioned balancing our spiritual life in Grahasta life. How about even in single life? So many things to juggle, going to work, doing some physical yoga, or any kind of that's how much I can only see a short message. When it gets really long, I can't see the rest. So I will answer up to that, what I can understand up to there. Yeah, the same in single life. Really, very similar. Very similar things apply because if you're not living in a temple, in an ashram, which most people are not these days, most devotees are not, then you have domestic duties to perform. You have to cook, you have to clean, shop, and whatever else. And basic things like you mentioned, yoga, looking after your health. So all these things have to be done. And Bhakti yoga means also karma yoga, which means that whatever we do, the principle is, and this is what Krishna talks about in the Bhagavad Gita, that whatever we do it for Krishna. We try to remember Krishna in whatever we're doing. And that's the way to spiritualize all our activities. So we can try in this way by chanting and hearing, and then doing whatever we have to do while still chanting and hearing, or by just learning to understand that this is all somehow for Krishna, either directly or indirectly. That if we want to be devotees, we have to devote our whole lives to Krishna. And of course, it's not easy because Maya is very strong. And the mind is always running this way and that way. And there are so many temptations around us. Social media. I mean, social media can be Krishna conscious, but it can also be a distraction sometimes. So we have to kind of create some kind of life for ourselves where we balance our priorities and mold our lives in such a way that we can, as far as possible, always remember Krishna. As Rupa Goswami said, always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. That is the first of all the principles. I'm getting a sorry, I went off there. So yeah, they're saying that we could carry on until 1 p.m. South Africa time, which is noon in UK. So the next question, okay, we got that one already. So there's another question from Ramya Arvind. In what context women are mentioned less intelligent in Srila Prabhupada's books? That is mentioned in Prabhupada's books, that women are less intelligent. I can't give you the exact quote, the verse or the purport off the top of my head, but what I can tell you is that this is it's a material consideration. It's a little bit confusing because there's different types of intelligence. So it's a little bit hard to understand exactly what that means. It can be understood in different ways. I would say in one way that I've observed it, and this is just my own personal observation, it might be different for you, but that men seem to be able to kind of grasp things in different areas. I could say sometimes in technical ways, in practical ways. Sometimes they can understand things, and also in terms of character judgment. As women, sometimes we tend to be a little more gullible or naive, but that's not a general. I don't want to say that as a general statement, but that can be the case. But I think more importantly, I would like to share is that in the teachings of Queen Kunti, which is actually a transcript of a series of lectures that Prabhupada gave in Bombay. And there's actually a purport. It's from a class that when Prabhupada was talking about Queen Kunti, he mentioned her as being the most intelligent woman. So he was explaining that that in terms of spiritual intelligence, there is no bar. And that's actually how I would explain it. In material intelligence, there may be differences. And materially, in some ways, men may be more intelligent than women. But in spiritual intelligence, which is actually more important, and as I've been saying throughout this talk, how spiritual considerations are higher. So, sorry, I shouldn't shake the phone when I talk with my hand. When it comes to spiritual intelligence, there is no bar. And therefore, Queen Kunti is described as Srila Prabhupada as being the most intelligent woman because she was very advanced in her devotion. And actually, through following Krishna consciousness, that is how we develop our intelligence. And we develop our knowledge, which, as I was mentioning before, that a real knowledge is to understand the difference between matter and spirit. And there is no bar. In understanding spiritual life, there is no bar for women. They are equally qualified to understand Krishna consciousness, spiritual life, as men are, because this knowledge is knowledge of the soul. And spiritually, we are all equal, and that is spiritual equality. So the next question is from Prana Lula. Hare Krishna, how can we bring in our spouse and children to follow and understand Krishna consciousness? Okay, so presumably this means in the case where if the spouse is not Krishna conscious, is not a devotee, or maybe new to Krishna consciousness, maybe a new devotee, then how do we help them to follow and understand? Okay. So you have to become their guru in a sense that even though traditionally the man is supposed to be the guru in marriage, but that's also a detail that's adjustable. In fact, there is one quote from Prabhupada, and this was in a personal instruction to one of his disciples, that he said that in cases where the wife is more advanced than the husband in spiritual life, then she can become the guru. So again, this is where a spiritual principle overrides the Vedic instruction. The Vedic instruction is that man should be a guru, but the spiritual principle is that whoever is more advanced should be the guru. But then again, at the same time, we have to remember that because of the gender differences, and because a man, because of male psychology, he needs to feel that that he is in some way the leader, the protector, and that the woman is dependent on him. Then you have to be very careful in this regard. That in terms of maintaining the balance there, in terms of maintaining peace and harmony in the relationship, you have to allow the husband to feel like a man, not to make him feel like that you're his mother and he's your son, because that doesn't really work. Sometimes we tend to do that, but we have to be careful about that, because it can be a bit demeaning and humiliating for a man. And it's a different rasa between husband and wife, and rasa between mother and son. It's a different rasa, so they shouldn't be confused. We have to keep it clear. Sometimes they overlap, of course, but in little ways, but we have to keep that clear gender balance. So you teach him according to you mentioned the husband and the children. So the children, you teach them as a mother. The husband, you can teach him as a wife. So it's a different rasa. So you have to let him keep his dignity, but at the same time, you can teach him as far as he's receptive, as far as he's ready to hear and he wants to hear. You teach him, and as far as he's not really receptive, you teach him by example. When he wants to hear, you can teach him by words. And when he doesn't want to hear, you just teach him by your own example. Just try to be a good devotee, Krishna conscious yourself in your own behavior. And then he will become inspired by you. Because if you're telling him how he's supposed to behave, but then you're behaving differently, he's not going to become inspired by that. And even with children, actually teaching by example is the most potent way of teaching. But with children, you can also, obviously, you can order them around a bit more according to their age or whatever. You have to judge according to what you could do with them, and try to engage them in fun activities that they will actually enjoy, so that Krishna consciousness becomes a pleasure for them and not just a chore. Okay, so next we have another question. I think I won't always mention the names, because some of these questions might be a little bit, you might not want me to share your name. But dear mother, what if the husband stops the bhakti yoga practice? If the husband stops the bhakti yoga practice, that's unfortunate, but that is his choice. Krishna gives us all free will to choose whether to serve him or whether not to serve him. So if somebody stops practicing, there may be many different reasons for that, but there's nothing that okay, I shouldn't say there's nothing we can do. Sorry, I'll correct that. But we cannot control another person, is what I mean to say. Even if even if it's our partner, someone very close to us, we cannot control them, because everyone's got their own free will. So we have to let them be. But at the same time, we can try to encourage them, try to inspire them in different ways by our own example, by reaching out in whatever ways we can, but only so far as it's comfortable. But basically, we have to let them be, and maybe they're going through something, and we can pray for them. That is something that should help a lot. That is perhaps the best thing we can do is to pray for them and ask Krishna for guidance how we can help them. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we have to necessarily separate from them or anything like that. There's no need to do that because, unless, there are only in some special circumstance where separation may be necessary. But if someone stops practicing and following, that is not a good enough reason to separate, because it really depends on the circumstance of the situation. But we ought to try, as far as possible, to stay together, to support each other, to help each other, to respect each other's choices, and just try our best to make that work. Try to come to an understanding where we both allow each other. You allow him to do what he wants, and he allows you. As long as he allows you to practice and do what you want, then you should be able to come to agreement and understanding. And hopefully in due course of time, he will come around. He may be going through something that he has to go through, and eventually he will come around. So hang in there, be patient, be tolerant, and try to support him and pray for him. Hare Krishna. So the next question is from Navavrinda. Could you better explain Varnashram Dharma as a detail? Okay, well, Varnashram Dharma means what Varnashram Dharma basically means is engaging is that everyone is engaged in Krishna service, or everyone is engaged according to their nature, according to their abilities, their skills, and according to their position in spiritual life. So it is according to external details that Varnashram Dharma is given. So there's different dharmas, different duties for the 4 varnas and the 4 ashramas. And all of these are actually meant for spiritual advancement in Krishna consciousness. Of course, for people who are not devotees, they may just follow these without making spiritual advancement. But according to Srimad Bhagavatam, that all these duties are meant to be for advancement in devotional service, and otherwise they don't really give any spiritual benefit. So I meant in that sense that it's according to externals, according to our varna, our nature, and according to our ashram, whether we're married or single, brahmachari, sannyasi, etc. I hope that makes it clear. The next question, it's from Shalini Priya. What if you also tend to have quite a few male tendencies, for example, leadership or giving solutions, etc.? Yes, and that's fine. As I said before, that these tendencies are general, but we're all different. We're all unique individuals, and we have different tendencies. And you know, there are male and female qualities, and there are also males and females who have different mixtures of these qualities, because there are some, we all have a different balance of male and female qualities. In other words, there are sometimes men who have a little bit of feminine in them, or women who have a little bit of masculine. And then there's, you know, these days there's all this transgender and different kind of species. So that's fine if you have tendencies for leadership or giving solutions. Try to use those in Krishna's service. Whatever quality Krishna has given you, try to use those in his service. And hopefully you will get an opportunity to use those in his service. So try to find some opportunity to do that. And hopefully you will be accommodated. The next question is, Mataji, you said we need to do anything to protect marriage. Sometimes there are many Matajis who are in marriages where husband is abusive, vulgar, and violent, but they still stay in the marriage through such difficulties. What advice should we give them when they approach us for advice? Because my first instinct is, especially from you mentioning to do everything to protect our marriage. Oh, sorry, you said my first instinct is to leave, but what would you advise mentioning do everything to protect your marriage? Okay, well, I did mention that there are also some circumstances, some situations where separation has to be advised. When there is abuse like this, then we shouldn't really advise women to stay in that situation. This is a very sensitive topic, and it's also, of course, a matter of choice, of individual choice. But my suggestion would be, where there is actually violence, physical abuse, don't stay there. At the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to your solicitor and start a divorce proceeding. I would say separate yourself. You know, you go and stay with your family or friends or whatever works for you. And then there are different kind of processes that could be taken up, such as counseling for the husband. If the husband, if he actually recognizes that he has done something wrong, if he is ready to apologize, if he is ready to repent, to ask for forgiveness, then you could give him another chance, but perhaps subject to some kind of counseling or help like that. So these are different things that can be done. But if he goes for counseling and if he takes help, he really is trying to bend his ways, then when you feel ready, that you could go back and give him another chance. But if you choose to, but really, I think no one else can tell you at what point you choose to do that or not, because physical abuse is a horrible thing and no one should have to accept that. So really, you need to think this through, take advice from senior people, from professionals, and do what has to be done. Try to save your marriage if it's possible. Sadly, if it's not, then what to do? Hare Krishna. Okay, the next question. is from Spring Horton. Although we are all different and therefore not equal, it is difficult to encounter institutional codification of differences by gender, as if we were all different and yet all the same, based on bodily concept. The desire for equality that I see is the desire for access based on capabilities rather than a desire for equality for all. Yes, well, that's why I was saying that equality is something spiritual. Yeah. Sorry, I'll read your question again. So I'm just trying to understand it properly. We are all different and not equal. It's difficult to encounter institutional codification of differences by gender as if we were all different and yet all the same based on bodily concept. Desire for equality is desire for access based on capabilities rather than desire for equality for. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. It may be. It's. I mean, I suppose it's different for different people. Some people they just want access based on capabilities. They want access to be able to engage their unique skills, and some people want like general equality, which general equality it doesn't even exist on a material level anyway. So it's really it's a bit of a pie in the sky. So I'm not sure exactly what your question is. It's more of a statement than a question. So as if we were all different and yet all the same based on godly conception. We are, this bodily conception, we're all different. And on spiritual, we're all equal, well, because we're all different as well as spiritual beings. But we're all equal in the sense that no one is better than anyone else. We all have equal access when it comes to Krishna consciousness. We all have equal access to Krishna. Hope that helps. Next question. I've been seeing the rest coming up when I click more. Before, when I click more, it wasn't coming up, but now it is. Thank you. Coming here. Okay, this one is coming up. Urmil Yadav. What do we do if we get married to a non-devotee? How do we continue with our spiritual and maintain a balance in our married life? Well, there are different options. You can either help him to become a devotee. Of course, that may take some time, and only if he's open to the idea. That's an ongoing thing, obviously. So I think this is something you have to negotiate with your partner, that you have your spiritual life that you would like to follow, and you need some space to do that, and you negotiate that space, and so that you could carry on your spiritual life, and at the same time you can carry out your duties in married life to your husband and your family. So that's something you have to talk about, and if you can both be reasonable about that, then you can find a way to do both. It's not easy, but you can find a way to balance it so that you can fulfill both of those commitments. So it's a challenge for you because neither of them should be neglected. So good luck with that, and pray to Krishna. I'm sure he will help you. Hare Krishna. Okay, I think I don't see any more questions there. Are there any more questions? Wait, we've got actually, wait, there's I think we've covered all the questions. We've got some comments here, but I think we've covered all the questions as far as I can see. So I guess we'll stop there and give you all a break. So thank you very much, all of you, for listening. Sorry that the quality was not so good because we had to switch from Zoom to Facebook, and then I couldn't get the camera on my, the Facebook was not supported by the camera on my laptop. So I had to do it like this. I hope you've been able to hear me. And thank you all very much for listening. And Hare Krishna.